Now, next up, we look at the political reaction. Let's return first, though, to the words of Henry Nowak's family. We do not want his death to be used to create further division, hatred, or tension. We want his story to make our streets safer for everyone. They went on, as the KC, the lawyer for the prosecution, summed up in court. This is not a case about Sikhism. This is not a case about racism. This is a case about murder. Here's how Nigel Farage responded.
Henry's family have responded to this in just the most extraordinarily dignified way. But I suggest the rest of us respond to this with pure, cold rage.
On Wednesday in Parliament, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer accused the Reform UK leader of ignoring the wishes of Nowak's family. This followed a riot on Tuesday night in Southampton when Nowak died. Crowds gave Nazi salutes while, at the same time, chanting Nowak's final words, "I can't breathe." They were led by the far-right pundit Tommy Robinson. The killer was a Sikh man, so naturally those marching shouted Islamophobic slurs.
Our nation has been invaded by people who care nothing for us, nothing for this country. Many of them bow down to the false God of Islam. This is a Christian nation.
They also called for the deportation of all migrants. Inflammatory rhetoric has come from across the right. In accelerating order, the Conservatives, Reform UK, Restore UK. After 2 years of racist rioting during the summer months, June brings fears across the UK of similar scenes, particularly among minority communities. What does this say about our political climate today? I'm joined now by journalist and expert on nationalism, Daniel Trilling. Daniel, welcome to MEELive. What do you make of the response by politicians to the case of Henry Nowak?
Well, I think, as you summarised, from across the broad right of politics, there have been efforts to exploit this case, in some cases for malicious ends. I think two things are going on at once, actually, at the moment. There is this broad backlash against the gains of social liberalism that blame sort of any number of ills in contemporary society on 20 or 30 years of what the right call wokeness, what they used to call political correctness back in the 80s and 90s. And there's a kind of mild version of that the mainstream right indulge in. But I think what's making a much bigger impact on politics is from the radical right and far right, an effort to rile people up around these issues, and in some cases to encourage kind of open racist resentment that, as we see, is spilling out into violence and disruption on the streets.
Now, talk to me about the role of Restore UK. This is the new sort of far-right competitor party to Reform UK. Also, their firebrand leader, Rupert Lowe. Some people saying that Farage came out, waded into this, really triggered this whole situation as part of a bid to appeal to the audience that he might lose to Restore UK. Do you agree with that analysis? Is that party going to be pushing Reform UK further to the right?
Yeah, I do agree. I think at the moment, understanding Restore Britain is actually all about the effect it's having on Nigel Farage and Reform. And I think Farage's intervention this week in response to the conclusion of the trial of Henry Nowak's murderer was heavily shaped by the pressure that he's now getting from even further to his right. Farage is a very skillful politician, and one of the reasons he's been so skillful and has managed to sustain a political career over so many decades is because he's historically been very good at treading the fine line between mainstream respectability and radicalism. And in previous similar occasions, he has he's tended to intervene with more of a nudge and a wink. So after the Southport murders in 2024, when there was lots of inflammatory rhetoric, particularly online, about the purported identity of the killer and, similar kind of calls for racist violence, Farage did intervene, but it was much more a kind of insinuation. He said, what aren't we being told by the police? This time around, he's come out and said something much more forthright, more extreme, I think. And that's because Restore Britain are now a threat to his party's dominance of the populist right, and obviously they've got this very important by-election for the British the UK National Parliament coming up later this month in Makerfield, in Greater Manchester, where it's very close between Andy Burnham, the Labour candidate, and Reform's candidate, and Restore look like they're picking up a few percent of the vote, maybe as high as 7 or 8%. And actually that could make the difference between Reform winning or losing that by-election. So I think, they are having an effect on British politics now, and it's to drag the already pretty extreme populists of Reform UK further to the right.
I was going to ask about the Makerfield election and whether this was sort of part of the pre-election campaign already. I guess then, given that you brought that up, you think it probably does give us a pretty good sense of what might be coming up with those election campaigns. But that's not just with Restore Britain, thank you, and Reform UK. I mean, I'm also curious what it tells us about how Labour might behave, because right now with the government response, yes, we have seen criticism of Farage and his behaviour. Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood said the police in this country have a sacred duty to police without fear or favour. Everyone is equal before the law. On policing, Starmer said there are serious questions for the police on how accusations of racism inform decision-making. What hasn't been said in response to the claims of Nigel Farage about two-tier anti-white policing? We haven't heard these Labour ministers explicitly say that two-tier policing is a myth. I'm curious, why do they refuse to address this misinformation flat out?
I think, frankly, it's cowardice, political cowardice. The Labour leadership, faced with the rise of a far-right populist party, Reform UK, over the 2 years it's been in government, have panicked, have sought to split the difference between their own position and Reform's position repeatedly, and seem to think that too strong a rhetorical challenge to the narrative propagated by Reform and the right more broadly would somehow rebound on Labour and cause them problems. And that's because, I think it's partly because they're very aware that they're losing support in key constituencies that have traditionally been part of Labour's broader electoral coalition to Reform. And it's also partly because I think they have got no strategy from confronting the very heavily right-wing dominated media in Britain. That also what they say is also almost always calibrated to stay within the boundaries that have been set for the government by the traditional right-wing press. And so I think in combination, that means that rather than using their position, highly influential position to push back convincingly against racist rhetoric and myth-making and so on, they're doing a really bad job, which is kind of encouraging it. And also the kind of underlying logic of this, well, we mustn't upset the right because we're seeking to win back voters tempted by Reform, hasn't worked on its own terms, and also has caused them even greater problems, because what's happened is that a load of disgruntled Labour voters who have socially liberal views are now splitting off and voting for the Green Party or just not voting for Labour.
No, I think you're right to bring in the media here. There's questions our media needs to answer about how it incentivises politicians to behave. Often I think we reward politicians with headlines, not on the basis of how effective their policy making is, how much it helps people, but really how effective it is as clickbait, how much it helps the media get traffic. We have, before the media, we were talking about politicians, I suppose, people who are actually in the Houses of Parliament. We have to talk about the figure here, Tommy Robinson. Tommy Robinson led the Southampton protest on this topic of two-tier. Right, you talk about two-tier justice. That has been a term that is being very freely bandied about now by Nigel Farage in very direct racialised terms. it's also used by Robert Jenrick of Reform, formerly Conservatives. But as far as I understand, this term was first really developed as a trending term by Tommy Robinson during the 2024 summer riots. So here we have an example of how this fringe far-right figure, a former convict, former football hooligan, is directly shaping mainstream UK politics to really a very, very significant effect. Not just on the right, but it's also informing how Labour is behaving, as we've just discussed. How much influence does Tommy Robinson have over our mainstream political landscape today?
Well, I think Tommy Robinson is a symptom of something a bit wider, which is a large part of our political and media class are having their frame of reference set and pulled rightwards by X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, which has been taken over and reshaped by a far-right American billionaire. And, as a journalist who's used that platform a lot over the years and knows how kind of important it has been in the past, both to sort of do my reporting work, but also getting a sense of where political debate is at, understanding arguments on different sides of an issue, I'm shocked that so many people are still using it for that purpose when it has so obviously become a reservoir of hate, racism and lies, frankly. And, the way that the algorithm prioritizes certain types of content, feeds content to users that they haven't asked for and so on, and not least that Elon Musk, the platform's owner, himself personally spouts out racist and fascist rhetoric, is having a real, all of that is having a really damaging effect on the people that are there soaking it up, which includes many of the most influential people in the British political media class. And the entire environment is essentially designed to make somebody with the views and behaviour of Tommy Robinson flourish there, build up huge audiences and propagate these ideas and far-right memes and so on. And you mentioned this claim of two-tier justice that sort of started with him or with people around him and has gone into the mainstream. That's by no means the only time that's happened in the last couple of years. There's been this phrase used in British politics for the last year or so, the Boris wave, which refers to the spike in immigration that happened shortly after the pandemic in Britain. And Boris there refers to Boris Johnson, the former British Prime Minister, and the fact that his government was elected on a promise that it would reduce overall immigration, and immigration actually went up in their term of government. Boris wave again was a phrase that started among far right extreme accounts on X, with an overtly kind of racialized connotation to it, but then was just kind of absorbed into the Westminster discourse and used not only by very right-wing MPs, but some Labour MPs as well. So I think that's the real problem underlying all of this.
Yeah, and you're so right to point out the role of Elon Musk here, especially with Tommy Robinson. Elon Musk has made it very clear Tommy Robinson is, at the moment at least, his sort of favourite of the UK bunch. He's paid his legal fees in incidents and algorithmically, potentially, given him significant favour. And I think that something that shows here is the international nature of the far-right movement, because if Elon Musk is having such a direct influence, well, that is what we would classify as foreign interference in a democracy, in UK democracy. This issue that this episode is about, the murder of Henry Nowak, his death in police custody in Southampton. This appears to be a very local issue about which these rioters were protesting. But this is not a local movement, is it?
No, absolutely not. And I mean, this has been the big change in far right and right wing nationalist politics over the past decade or so, which it has become a movement that exists internationally, online and offline, and things that happen in one country have knock-on effects elsewhere. People committed to that movement can share ideas and resources in a way that they weren't able to before. But I think crucially, and this seems to be a particular issue for the UK, an event in one country can become a rallying point for the whole international far right loose movement that is interested in it. And this happens again and again with Britain, I think, because Britain has kind of become symbolic to far-right nationalists and white supremacists and so on, as they see it, a symbol of everything that is wrong with multiculturalism and liberal immigration policies and left-leaning liberal elites and so on. And I mean, it's based on myths and lies. You know, one of the key images that has been very prominent in the far right global imagination, for example, is of London as this crime-ridden hellhole where the crime is perpetrated by immigrants and Muslims and people from ethnic minority communities. That's been going on for a decade. I mean, and it's for someone from London, I find it very surreal, because obviously that's how bits of the UK right-wing press have portrayed London for years and years, and you've kind of got used to that, being, oh, okay, fine, they're sort of doing it and they put it in their newspaper and so on, and then suddenly it's like these people on the other side of the world are doing it as well, not least Donald Trump when he was active on Twitter during his first term as president. And as this has kind of grown, there's been this kind of feedback loop where then that itself, you know, what Elon Musk pumps out about London and the UK and so on, then is fed back into the minds of people here in the UK who absorb this stuff on social media and pick up the ideas, and that in turn spills out onto the street. So it's a very dangerous dynamic, I think.
Daniel Trilling, thank you so much for joining me here on MEELive.